안녕하세요.
The city of Seoul never slept. Among gleaming skyscrapers and bustling avenues, the Kang Group stood out as an empire of power and prestige. At the top of this conglomerate was Kang Ji-ho, a CEO known for his ruthless coldness and obsessive dedication to business. To him, emotions were distractions, and his life was meticulously planned for success. However, fate, always unpredictable, was about to challenge his convictions. On the other side of the city, Ha Yoon-ji adjusted her simple blouse and grabbed her worn-out bag. As a temporary employee at the Kang Group, her routine was exhausting, but she never complained. She desperately needed the job to support her sick mother and pay off overdue bills. Despite the fatigue, she maintained a strong spirit and a quiet hope that one day her life would change. The first meeting between Ji-ho and Yoon-ji happened in an unexpected way. That morning, the CEO was leaving a tense meeting when, distracted by the next billion-dollar contract, he turned the corner of the hallway hastily. At the same moment, Yoon-ji was also walking quickly, carrying a pile of documents in her arms. The collision was inevitable. Papers flew through the air, scattering confidential reports across the building's gleaming floor. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Yoon-ji felt her heart stop as she realized who stood before her. Ji-ho, with his imposing presence and piercing gaze, seemed dissatisfied with the situation. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly irritated. "Do you always walk without looking where you're going?" His deep voice broke the silence. Yoon-ji blinked rapidly, her body frozen between fear and embarrassment. Feeling her face heat up, she immediately crouched down to pick up the documents. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kang. I didn't see," her voice faltered, and she cursed herself for it. Ji-ho observed her for a moment. Normally, he would completely ignore such an incident, but something about her made him hesitate. Perhaps it was her eyes, which didn't just show fear, but also determination. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in years, someone made him feel disconnected from the absolute control he exercised over his own life. With a short sigh, he crouched down and began gathering the documents alongside her. The gesture surprised Yoon-ji, who never expected a man like him to lower himself to help a mere employee. "Be more careful next time," Ji-ho said, handing her the last of the papers. Yoon-ji nodded, swallowing hard. Before she could thank him, he had already straightened up and walked away with his impeccable posture. But as he moved, Ji-ho noticed something strange. For the first time in a long while, his mind wasn't solely focused on numbers and strategies. The image of that woman lingered, challenging his relentless logic. The following days were a challenge for Ji-ho. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get Ha Yoon-ji out of his mind. His life had always been organized like a precise equation: work, success, and discipline. But now, an unexpected variable threatened his absolute control. Yoon-ji, on the other hand, did everything she could to avoid any further encounters with Ji-ho. After the document incident, she felt vulnerable under the scrutinizing eyes of her coworkers, who hadn't missed the opportunity to gossip about the fact that the CEO himself had helped pick up papers for her. The last thing she needed was to attract more attention. However, fate seemed to have other plans. On a rainy morning, Yoon-ji was called to deliver documents directly to Ji-ho's office. Her heart raced as she approached the smoke glass door. She took a deep breath and knocked before entering. Ji-ho stood by the panoramic window holding a cup of coffee. When he heard the door open, he turned, his gaze locking onto hers. "Mr. Kang, here are the requested reports," she said, keeping her voice steady. He walked over to his desk, taking the documents from her hands. The brief touch sent a slight shiver through Yoon-ji, but she remained still, waiting for permission to leave. Ji-ho took longer than necessary to review the papers. He couldn't explain why he felt the need to prolong the moment. The silence in the room was thick, charged with a tension he wasn't used to feeling. "How long have you been working here?" he suddenly asked, catching her off guard. Yoon-ji blinked a few times before answering. "Almost a year, sir." Ji-ho nodded but said nothing. He realized he was interested in details about her that had never mattered to him before about any employee. This was dangerous. "You may go." His voice returned to its cold, professional tone. Yoon-ji gave a quick bow and left the office, unaware that Ji-ho continued watching her until the door closed. However, Their encounters would not end there. Fate seemed determined to intertwine their paths, and with each new meeting, a forbidden attraction grew one neither of them dared to admit. The atmosphere within the Kang Group began to shift. Employees noticed something different about the CEO Jiho, once impenetrable and distant, seemed distracted. He asked unusual questions, appeared in departments he had never visited before, and his attention, however subtle, lingered on Ha Yunji more than it should have. Rumors started spreading through the hallways. Small glances, chance encounters, and tense silences did not go unnoticed. Some whispered that Yunji was trying to seduce Jiho to climb the corporate ladder. Others simply watched, curious to see how far this would go. Yunji, for her part, tried to remain indifferent to it all. She avoided direct encounters, focused on her work, and made sure to blend in with the other assistants to avoid drawing more attention. But it was impossible to pretend that her heart didn't race whenever she passed Jiho in the corridor, or when their gazes locked for a second longer than necessary. The situation escalated when Yunji was summoned to accompany Jiho to an important corporate event. The CEO always relied on his personal secretary for such occasions, but suddenly, the responsibility fell on Yunji. She tried to refuse, insisting that she wasn't qualified for the role, but Jiho's response was brief and final. "If I'm asking, it means you are qualified." His tone left no room for discussion. On the night of the event, Yunji wore a modest yet elegant dress, feeling out of place in the luxurious setting. Jiho, as impeccable as ever, stood beside her, but there was something different in his gaze when it landed on her. "You are well dressed," he said quickly, diverting his eyes. Yunji blinked in surprise. Was that a compliment? Coming from the relentless Kang Jiho? She merely murmured a quiet thank you, unsure how to react. The night seemed to be going well, until an influential investor approached Jiho, a sly smile on his lips. "Mr. Kang, I hear you've been paying special attention to one of your employees." The casual tone barely masked the underlying malice. Yunji froze, her face burning with embarrassment. Jiho kept his composure, but his expression turned as cold as ice. "My employees are competent. If I pay attention, it's because I value good professionals." His voice was sharp, a clear warning that this conversation should not continue. But the damage was done. The next day, the rumors spread even further, this time reaching the ears of the Kang family. Jiho's mother called immediately, her voice laced with disapproval. "I hope these rumors are false, Jiho. You know what your duty is to this family." He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his responsibilities colliding with something he had never allowed before: genuine desire. He knew he was in danger, but for the first time he didn't want to run. The tension within Kang Group had reached its breaking point. The rumor about the supposed closeness between Jiho and Yunji was no longer just hallway gossip. It had reached the board of directors. The shareholders, always concerned with the company's image, began questioning the CEO's behavior. But the biggest obstacle lay within his own home. That night, Jiho was summoned for dinner at the Kang family residence. The setting was luxurious but cold. His father, Kang Dae-hyun, sat at the head of the table, while his mother, Han Soo-jin, maintained an impassive expression. The dinner proceeded in a cutting silence until Dae-hyun's deep voice filled the space. "Do you have any idea what you're doing, Jiho?" he asked bluntly. Jiho set down his utensils and faced his father, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "If you're referring to Ha Yunji, yes, I know exactly what I'm doing." His mother let out a heavy sigh. "An employee, Jiho? This is unacceptable. You have a legacy to protect. Your marriage must be a strategic alliance, not a choice driven by fleeting emotions." Jiho didn't waver. "I've always done everything for the sake of Kang Group. I sacrificed my personal life, my freedom, everything to follow this path. But this time, I won't give up on what I want." His father slammed his hand on the table, his expression filled with restrained fury. "Then you're willing to lose everything? If you continue with this stubbornness, you will no longer be the successor of Kang Group." Jiho felt the weight of those words. His entire life had been dedicated to proving himself worthy of that position. But now, he stood before a decision that could change everything. Meanwhile, Yunji was facing her own personal storm. At the office, the hostility grew by the day. Her immediate supervisor called her into a meeting and, with a sharp look, threw an envelope onto the table. "You're being transferred to the Busan branch. Effective immediately." Yoon-ji's heart stopped for a moment. They were trying to get rid of her. Her presence by Ji-ho's side had become inconvenient for the company. That night, she wandered aimlessly through the illuminated streets of Seoul, feeling powerless against everything that was happening. But before she could make a decision, a familiar voice called out to her, "Yoon-ji." She turned around and saw Ji-ho standing there, breathless. His eyes, always controlled, were filled with something she had never seen before: desperation. "Don't accept the transfer." He stepped closer. "Don't let them decide for us." Tears welled up in Yoon-ji's eyes. "Ji-ho, I don't want to be a burden to you." He took her hands firmly in his. "You were never a burden, but I need to know, do you still want to stay by my side?" In that moment, Yoon-ji knew she, too, had a choice to make. The rain drummed softly against the windows of Ji-ho's apartment as he gazed down at the city from above. His empire, his position, his family, none of it seemed to matter in the face of the possibility of losing Ha Yoon-ji. Since his conversation with his parents and their decision to push her out of the company, he knew he had to act. That night, Ji-ho called for an emergency meeting with the Kang Group's board of directors. He arrived with his usual imposing presence, but this time, something was different. His eyes no longer held only the calculated coldness he was known, for there was a spark of defiance. "I understand that a recent decision was made to transfer an employee to the Busan branch." His voice echoed through the conference room. "And I know that this decision had nothing to do with her professional performance." The directors exchanged glances. The chairman of the board, an older man with graying hair and a stern gaze, cleared his throat. "Ji-ho, you need to understand that certain relationships compromise the company's image. We must keep Kang Group's reputation untarnished." Ji-ho crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, a cold smile forming on his lips. "The company's reputation will not be tarnished by who I choose to be by my side. If necessary, I'll put my position on the line." A murmur rippled through the room. No one expected Kang Ji-ho, the heir of the dynasty, to threaten to walk away for a woman. But Ji-ho wasn't bluffing. The meeting was heated, but in the end the board realized they couldn't afford to lose a leader like him. The order for Yoon-ji's transfer was revoked. Meanwhile, Yoon-ji had already decided to leave the company. She was packing her things when she heard a knock at the door of her small apartment. When she opened it, she found Ji-ho standing there, drenched from the rain. His expression a mix of relief and determination. "You're not going to Busan," he announced, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I fought for you, Yoon-ji. Now I need to know if you're willing to fight for us too." Her eyes filled with tears. Going through all these hardships had made her doubt whether this love was even possible. But seeing Ji-ho standing before her, ready to face everything and everyone, she knew she was ready too. She stepped forward and took his hand. "I never wanted anything else, Ji-ho." He smiled, for the first time in a long time, feeling that he was exactly where he was meant to be. But there was still one last battle to face Shi's family. The final confrontation took place at the Kang mansion. Ji-ho had scheduled a meeting with his parents, determined to put an end to this war once and for all. When he arrived, he found his mother seated with her usual rigid posture, while his father maintained a stern expression. "I'm going to marry Ha Yoon-ji." The words came out firm, without hesitation, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The room fell into silence for a long moment. Ji-ho's mother let out a deep sigh, bringing her teacup to her lips before responding. "Are you really willing to risk your entire legacy for a woman?" Her voice was controlled, but there was a trace of disbelief. Ji-ho kept his gaze locked on his mother. "I'm willing to build a new legacy if necessary, but I will not give up my happiness." His father scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're being foolish, Ji-ho. Love doesn't sustain an empire. But without love, an empire becomes a burden." Ji-ho responded, his voice filled with emotion. This time, his father didn't argue back. There was something different about Ji-ho. It wasn't just rebellion or impulse, it was genuine determination. After a long silence, his mother placed her teacup on the table and looked at him directly. If this is what you want, then so be it. But I hope you won't regret it, Jiho. For the first time, she didn't issue an order or a threat. Jiho knew that. For his mother, this was a silent acceptance. A few days later, Jiho and Yoonji were married in an intimate ceremony, far from the spotlight and the pressures of high society. She wore a simple dress, but to him, it was the most breathtaking sight he had ever seen. As she walked toward him at the altar, Jiho felt for the first time that he was completely free. "Are you sure about this?" Yoonji whispered with an emotional smile. Jiho took her hands firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Their wedding marked the start of a new chapter. Jiho remained at the helm of Kang Group, but now on his own terms. Yoonji found her place within the company, recognized for her competence and dedication. Years later, a small pair of feet ran across the garden of their home. Jiho, sitting on the porch, watched as his son played, while Yoonji approached holding a cup of tea. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his quiet smile. Jiho looked at her, then back at the child running across the yard. "I finally understand what happiness is." Yoonji smiled and sat beside him. Jiho took her hand, squeezing it gently, feeling the absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. And so, against all odds, the billionaire CEO found something far more valuable than power and wealth: a true love and a home forever. The end, or rather, a new beginning.